Have you ever been tempted to get discouraged during trials and when trouble comes? Have you ever been tempted to think that God does not care? That God doesn't love me? That maybe God's too busy? Maybe my problems are not that big enough to the Lord? Or wondering, will God ever even help me? This has gone on for a long time. Will God even help me? Well, David in Psalm 17 teaches us about who God is, because he had troubles. He had some enemy. We don't know who that was. It could have been Saul. It could have been Absalom. It could have been an unknown, somebody we don't even know about, that's not even an event recorded in Scripture. As far as I'm talking about in Samuel and First Kings, I should say. But we don't know, even though we don't know who this enemy is, David goes to God and he prays. And there's attributes of the Lord that this psalm teaches us who God is and who is the God we pray to. No matter what happens in life, that we can learn about God in this, because we need to know. I think that's very much a problem in the modern church, that we don't know who God is and who we are. You know that, and we need to know who He is. We need to know very much who God is. And the God who we pray to, because we cannot pray to a God if we don't know who He is. Otherwise, we're going to have a God of our own imagination. A God that somehow we think we can control. That's really what it is when people, that don't want to know who God is. They want a God who they can control and a God of their own imagination. But we must go to who God is and how He's revealed Himself. And so we need to review for a few minutes from last week. The Psalm 17, 1 and 2 began with David being falsely accused. He says, that it begins in verse 1, a prayer of David, hear a just cause, O Lord, give heed to my cry, give ear to my prayer, which is not from deceitful lips. Let my judgment come forth from your presence, let your eyes look with equity. That what is going on in the psalm is he's falsely accused. His enemy is trying to harm him, if not kill him. And so David is calling out to the Lord to give heed, give ear to my prayer. Hear a just cause, give heed to my cry. And so he's calling out to God that he has this problem. He's crying out to the Lord that it's an urgent, especially because of hear, give, and give ear. Of those three, hear and give heed and give ear. All three of those things give a sense of urgency. Have you ever been in a situation that was urgent? Very much so. That I know I've been in different situations that are urgent, that of times or trials that came and need an answer. We need an answer soon. That it couldn't wait a year or two from now. That we need an answer soon, as we trust the Lord to do in His timing, though. And then we learned last week that when you pray to a God who's omniscient, because that's what David is doing when he says, my prayer is not from deceitful lips, because he's not trying to be tricky, he's not trying to lie. And then he says in verses 3 through 5 that you have tried my heart, you have visited me by night, you have tested me, and you find nothing. I have purposed in my mouth that my mouth will not transgress. As for the deeds of men, by the words of your lips, I have kept from the paths of the violent. My steps have held fast to your paths. My feet have not slipped. What he's speaking of is that he is innocent of these charges, of being slandered, falsely accused. He's not saying that he has never sinned a day in his life. We know that's not true. David was not perfect. But what he was saying is he's seeking to obey God and walk in God's ways. So he's not trying to be somebody who's lying, a liar and crafty. He's not trying to go and do whatever he wants. He's seeking to please God, though imperfectly, still trying to walk in God's ways. And he's saying, God, you know these things. And we know that's because God is omniscient. God, you have tried my heart and you found nothing. That you know I'm innocent of what I'm being accused of. Just like Job, when his friends come, Job, you're a great sinner. This is why you are suffering. Job's friends had a small view of God. They couldn't see, they had this only that the righteous never suffer, and the wicked are the ones that are always punished. And they're the ones that suffer, rather than, that's not how the world works in a sin-cursed world. And so they didn't have a right view of God. And so we need to have a right view of God, and we see that God knows all things. God knows our heart. When we are falsely accused, when we're falsely accused, we can trust ourselves to God who knows, God who is judge. And then also now, when you pray to God who is really the God of love. God is that a loving God. I could have said it many different ways, but the God who loves us, who cares for us, who is gracious and merciful. Verse 6, I have called upon you, for you answer me, O God. Incline your ear, hear my speech. Here's again this urgency from David. He continues to appeal to God for help. He's appealed not because he is rebellious to the Lord, but he's seeking a heart that obeys God and walks in his ways. And he's confident because of that he will hear and answer, because sin will hinder your prayers. Unconfessed sin is a barrier to prayers. It always is. And David says he's confident that God will answer him because of going back before, when he appealed to God who's omniscient, God who knew he was innocent of this, that God will hear him. And hear my speech, that God will help and protect him from whoever this enemy may be. Because he's not just wanting God to hear and do nothing. Because sometimes people want just somebody they can talk to. But that's not what David wants, is just somebody a shoulder to cry on and do nothing, but just to hear them and maybe vent, as some people do. That's not what he wants. When he says, listen, hear, incline, he's calling God to come and act. To come and act. He's in danger and needs help. He doesn't need to vent. He doesn't need to do any of those things. He needs help right then and now. In verse 7, he says, wondrously show your loving kindness, O Savior, of those who take refuge at your right hand from those who rise up against them. There's actually 3 allusions in this verse that refer back to a song of Moses. That song is found in Exodus. When God had drowned the Egyptians in the Red Sea, and Israel had crossed over onto dry land. They're out of this song of Moses when they were praising God for what he has done and how he's helped, especially when they were fearful. When the Israelites had complained, they said, they're complaining about God to Moses, and to Moses as well, that you just brought us out here to die. It would have been better for us to have stayed in Egypt. Is there not enough graves in Egypt, is what they were speaking of, that you want us in the wilderness to die? But God wondrously saved them. And that's what these allusions are, that when comes from, that wondrously loving kindness and right hand. Right hand speaks of God's power. Wondrously, that here of God, also another way of God's power, his miracles, and this on display. And loving kindness is that Hebrew word hesed that it's hard to translate as one word because it's God's faithfulness, His love, His mercy, His grace, all the promises that that are in His covenant with His people. And so Exodus 15, 11, 13 is where David is alluding to. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in praises, working wonders? You stretch out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your loving kindness you have led the people whom you have redeemed. In your strength you have guided them to your holy habitation. I mean, why is that important? That David is alluding back to a song of Moses that has to do with the Egyptian army being drowned and Israel crossing the Red Sea. Because David is not calling for God's help based on his own ideas of who he thinks God is. As some people do. And that's a problem in the church. Not knowing who God is. Not going to the Word of God where He's revealed Himself. David is calling upon God who has revealed Himself in His Word. He's calling upon the God who is all-powerful and who works wonders. Calling upon God who is faithful, loving, merciful, who keeps His covenant to His people and all those promises He has. A God who never changes, who is always the same. The same yesterday, today, and forever, as Jesus Christ is described. God who never changes. And so out of this is that here God is immutable. He never changes. And so He doesn't change His love. He's a loving, gracious God who loves His people and cares about them. And so the same God you pray to is the same God who displayed His love and His power when He rescued Israel, drowning the Egyptian army, and they crossed over onto dry land. It's the same God who rescued David multiple times. That the same God when Saul, on 2 occasions, almost found David in the cave. One, and David could have killed him. And God had rescued him out of his hand. David went out down into the middle of the camp and got the spear and jug of water. And there were other times when David was pursued and God had rescued him. But this God never changes. This God never changes His love. When you are a believer, nothing you do makes God love you any more or any less. Does God hate sin? Does that grieve God? And especially the scriptures say it grieves the Holy Spirit. Yes, but God doesn't change His love. He never changes in any way. He doesn't go back on His promises. He is faithful. And so it's not just love is the only attribute in here, but also a God who never changes as well. A God who is faithful. A God who is gracious and merciful. This is the God that we pray to. This is a God that David prays to. Verse 8. Look at that with me. This speaks more on the love of God as well, that keep me as the apple of the eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings. Keep me as the apple of your eye. That phrase refers to the pupil of the eye and what it sees. In the Hebrew, it's actually the little man of the eye. And why is that? Because the expression describes how you can see yourself looking into someone else's eyes. Have you ever looked into somebody close enough that if you're looking in somebody's eyes and you could see yourself reflected in there? And you can. Especially when you're close, that when you're looking in your spouse's eyes, you can see that your reflection back. What David is asking for God is to never let him out of his sight, is really what he's saying. And what he means by that is that he knows that God is omnipresent, so it's impossible that there would be any moment that God would ever lose track of him or never see him. There's not a place he can hide that God cannot see. What this is describing is that God's loving and protective care, that God would protect him all times, that God would have his gracious eye on him to protect him and not let harm come at any time from this enemy. That's what he is saying. And this actually comes from another song of Moses. In Deuteronomy 32:10, he found him in a desert land in the howling wastes of a wilderness. He encircled him, he cared for him, he guarded him as the pupil of his eye. That's the same expression. That here God was protecting Israel. Had his watchful, loving care. And then look at verse 8 again. It speaks of, hide me in the shadow of your wings. This is another expression of loving care, of loving protection. Just as, keep me as the apple of your eye. Both of these expressions that are found in 32. Deuteronomy 32, a song of Moses. Praising God for his faithfulness and who he is, in contrast to the unfaithfulness of Israel. Verse 10 I read is where the apple of the eye, the pupil, or of God's watchfulness, his loving protection. Verse 11 describes God's loving protective care as a bird who protects her young under her wing. I mean, I remember back in the spring I used this illustration, and it ended up not being a true story, but it still illustrated the truth about who God is. That there was a story circulated around that after a forest fire out west, that one of the rangers was going to assess the damage and saw at the base of a tree a bird and wondered was it still alive or not, but came close and saw that it was charred and end up moving it a little bit, and from underneath this bird's wings came the baby chicks. That where this mother bird had made the decision to protect her young and perish in the fire. It ended up not being a true story, but it still illustrates that hide me underneath the shadow of your wing, of God's protective care. Deuteronomy 32:11 is where that's also used in the Song of Moses. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its young. He spreads his wings and caught them. He carried them on his pinions. Hide me under your wing. Hide me underneath your wing. David uses that in Psalm 57:1 too. 51 also is what I'm trying to say. 57:1. For the choir director, set to Altasheth, a mitcom of David, when he fled from Saul in the cave. Be gracious to me, O God, be gracious to me, for my soul takes refuge in you, and in the shadow of your wings I will take refuge until destruction passes by. Hide me in the shadow of your wings. Jesus used that expression, lamenting over Jerusalem. In Matthew 23:37, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks in her wings, and you were unwilling. This shows that God is gracious and merciful and loving and cares. This is the God whom you pray to. He lovingly protects his people. He never changes. So you don't have to be wondered, does God even care? Because you're going to be tempted when times come, during trials and seasons of life. Does God care? The answer is yes, he does care for his people. If you belong to him, and he cares. He very much cares. And David knows this is who God is. That's why he prays that way. He knows God is a loving God who will protect him. That's why he says, keep me in the apple of your eye. Hide me under the shadow of your wing. He knows that this is God who is omnipresent, who will lovingly protect him, and cares. Do you know this about God? Do you pray this way? Verses 8 and 9 of Psalm 17. Let's read that again. that keep me as the apple of the eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings from the wicked who despoil me, my deadly enemies who surround me. That's why he's saying shadow of your wing, apple of your eye. They despoil him, they surround him. Whoever these enemies are, they're intent on harming him, even killing him. That's why David describes them as despoil me, which also means to devastate, destroy, ruin. They're surrounded him. And David knows ultimately God is the one that protects him, the one that God can help him, the one whom he should trust and protect him. Because if this is when he's a king, he's not putting his trust in his army or his mighty men. As you read those 30 men that did, and plus a few others, that did heroic deeds. He's not trusting the one that was able to snatch out a spear from an Egyptian and kill him with it. Or go down in the pit of a lion on a snowy day and kill it. Or be in the field and kill all these Philistines. He's not trusting that. He's trusting the Lord. If this is when he ran from Saul, he's not trusting those men either that have come to him and because they do not like what Saul is doing, and they know that David is anointed as king. Even though he's thankful for them, but he ultimately puts his trust in the Lord. And this is where your trust should be. This is where my trust should be. It never should be in people. It shouldn't be in possessions. It shouldn't be in anything. It should be in God and God alone to protect. That's where ultimately our trust is to be. Because he is the only one who can help and protect and provide. And then also, when you pray to God who not only is loving and omnipresent, who is faithful and never changes, but he's the one that protects. David describes his unnamed enemy. This is the first time he describes goes into more detail of his problem. Because he describes before he was describing who God is. See, this is why they're trying to harm him and surround him, because they have closed their unfeeling heart. With their mouth they speak proudly. It's a proud and arrogant enemy. Close their unfeeling heart goes beyond just the fact they're indifferent and callous towards his feelings and what they're doing. The enemy is really, that they're rebellious to God. They have prospered in the world, and in their greed they rebelled against God and do not care about what their actions do. And they boast proudly about their rebellion, because it says they speak proudly. They're arrogant. Verse 11, they have now surrounded us in our steps. They have set their eyes to cast us down to the ground. Their enemy plans are cruel and destructive. They are intent on destroying David. Their eyes are intent on destroying David, but David is trusting that God will keep him the apple of his eye and protect him. Notice that there's a contrast there. God's eyes, he wants him to be the apple of his eye. Their eyes are intent on harm. And they're also described in verse 12 as a lion. He is like a lion that is eager to tear, and as a young lion lurking in hiding places. The enemy is described as a lion who's hungry, eager to destroy the prey and eat it, devour. This enemy is described as a young lion, not an old lion, but a young lion full of energy, ready to pounce as it hides and lurks on the unsuspecting prey. This enemy, I should say, may be arrogant and proud, does not care, ready to destroy. But this enemy is no match for the Lord. David again appeals to God. Arise, O Lord, confront him, bring him low. Deliver my soul from the wicked with your sword. Notice that to David, God was going to have him as the apple of his eye and be as a mother bird under his wings. To the enemy, God is a warrior, judge, and king in this passage, who is the king over all. There's several times in other Psalms that David describes God in a similar manner, of one where his sword is ready. And even in earlier Psalms, that when God is angry with the wicked every day, he has his bow He has his bow ready, that the arrow, just has to let go. Is the picture going? The picture that's in there. But in Psalm 9, 19 through 20, arise, O Lord, do not let man prevail. Let the nations be judged before you. Put them in fear, O Lord. Let the nations know that you are but men, that they are but men. Selah. That he's asking God to judge. That here, this picture of God as a judge, that he's going to rise as the king, as a warrior, as a judge here, ready to judge them, I should say, and to really to, if need be, kill them. The enemy's swords are intent on harming David and killing him. But David is calling upon God to use his sword in judgment and protect him and deliver him from his enemy. That's who God is. To us, apple of his eye. Protect under his wing. To those who hate him, he is a warrior and judge. And there is one day when he is going to judge this world. That whoever's name is not found in the Lamb's Book of Life will be cast in the lake of fire. So God is a God who protects, and that's who he is. But we have to remember that doesn't mean that nothing bad will ever happen. God is sovereign, God's in control. We know that nothing can happen unless it's God's will. He either commands it or allows it. He's sovereign, that he is in control. But that doesn't mean he does not allow things to happen. But when he does, I should say hard things, trials, when he does, that is because that is making us more like Christ. Romans 8:28, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. This is who our God is. We can pray to him when trouble comes, when we're in danger. Most of us will not be in danger of an enemy that comes and trying to kill us. Maybe that day will come, and I hope that never does. But in other countries it does. We have brothers and sisters in Christ that their homes are burnt, they're dragged out of churches and killed and chased. That happens in Muslim countries. That's happened in China. That they have torn down. I don't know enough about the theology of that church, but that just shows you a lot of what they think about God, just to tear down a church building while it's having a service. They've done that. North Korea, that to have a Bible, they put you in a death camp. That we have brothers and sisters in Christ that to be a Christian is that the death can come. Hated for Christ's sake. And they too can call out to the Lord for help. But whatever situation we're in, we can come to God and call for his help and protection. We don't have to be in a serious danger like this, where the enemy surrounds us. We can call upon his help whenever. But this God lovingly protects. This God is sovereign and can control. The enemy is not sovereign and in control. Their eye is intent on harming. Their sword is intent on harming. But God is going to use the sword to protect David and bring harm on them and judgment. And then also, when you pray to the God who satisfies, the God who is all you need. Psalm 17, verse 14, from men your hand, O Lord, from men of the world, whose portion is this life, and whose belly you fill with their treasure, they are satisfied with children, and leave their abundance to their babes. You know, in God's common grace, he gives food, he gives rain, he allows them to have possessions and home. He allows those things to happen. But they're not thankful. And in Matthew 5:45b says, for he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. But the thing is, in this verse, these people are only living for this world. They're satisfied with all this world has to offer. Food and children is what God describes. Is what David describes, that they are satisfied in this verse. Elsewhere in Scripture, God describes them as being satisfied with possessions and wealth and power and what this world has to offer. They are satisfied with leaving worldly goods to their children. They only live for this moment, but yet they will find out how meaningless it is. Because Mark 8:36 and 37, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his own soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? The world is satisfied with the things this world has to offer. And so they're happy with leaving an inheritance to their children. They're happy with possessions and power and money and a home. And if today it would be a car. And it'd be a good paying job. They're satisfied with sports. But David says that's not what satisfies him. And that's not what satisfies us. It shouldn't be. That if we live for this world, we will find, just as Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities. It's all in vanity. This world doesn't satisfy. It doesn't. And it shouldn't to you, if you're a believer. That you should find dissatisfaction with these things, that they are just really gifts that the Lord gives us to use for His glory and honor, but they don't satisfy. It's God who satisfies. That's what David says. He's not satisfied with those things. And I don't know what point in life this is, but he's probably married by now and has children. He's going to have some possessions, but he's not satisfied with those things. Because he knows that it's not wrong to enjoy what God has given, but it has a proper place. But it's God who ultimately satisfies. Because he says, Psalms 17:15, as for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. I will be satisfied with your likeness when I awake. This world doesn't satisfy David. This world doesn't satisfy the believer. It's God who satisfies David. David actually is what he's saying. He's looking forward to the day that he will be with God. He's looking forward to the future resurrection of God's people. And we know that's because of what Christ has done on the cross. Because he's imputed his righteousness to sinners, whom God justifies. Given the righteous Christ and forgiven. And we have a future glorification waiting for us because of Christ. And one day we will be with Him and we'll be like Him. Revelation 22:3-5. There will be no longer any curse, and the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and His bondservants will serve Him. They will see His face, and His name will be on their foreheads, and there will no longer be any night, and they will not have any need of the light of a lamp, nor the light of the sun, because the Lord God will illumine them, and they will be reigned forever and ever. And 1 John 3:2. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not appeared as yet what we will be. We know that when He appears, we'll be like Him, because we'll see Him just as He is. The future glorification, that what we'll be like Him, is that we're going to have a new body, one that will never die, one that will never sin. And what a wonderful day that is. I look forward to that, when never to sin again against God and to be with Him forever. Do you look forward to Christ's return? Do you look forward to these things? Does God satisfy you, or does the world satisfy you? And do you know Christ? Because you ought to be looking forward to Christ's return and to be satisfied with that, to be with God, who is the greatest of all joy. And look forward to when He returns. But while we're on this earth, this is the God we can pray to, a God who's loving, protective, faithful, who never changes, who is omnipresent, who is omniscient, a God who cares, that we can go before him. And he's the God who satisfies. Because the things of this world don't. They're vanity. They are a mirage. They look beautiful. The things of the world, I'm not talking about sinful things. I'm talking about things that are good things. But yet, they're still like a mirage. They may look nice, but you can't hold on to them. They do not last. They do not satisfy. It's Christ that satisfies. That's why he's living water. That's why when he came to the woman of the well, if you knew who I was, you would be asking me for a drink. Never thirsty again. We thirst but we thirst for God, the God who satisfies, not for the things of this world.